Previously on the Beetle 68. Deep in the void, the crew of the Beetle 68 discovers an ancient Terran-style mothership, a 7,000-year-old paradox drifting in the dark. What began as a salvage op turns into a tactical nightmare when the team breaches the hull to find the crew fused into a pulsating, hive-minded mass of flesh. As the derelict's crew wakes to the team's thermal signatures, the mission becomes a frantic race for survival. With the Beetle's auto turrets screaming and the biological horror attempting to latch onto their ship, the squad barely escapes the biological tomb. To end the choir of the damned, the captain orders a high-yield nuclear strike, atomizing the Titan and its suffering occupants. Now, clutching a stolen alien data core and drifting deeper into unknown space through a ruptured FTL bubble, the crew is left with one terrifying question: did we just destroy our past or our future? In the core room, the orange-tinted veil of gravity keeps the noise of our Osiris-7 engine from leaking into the void, maintaining a fragile silence. Kalen confirmed the muffle is holding at 98% efficiency and the radiation leak is contained. He warned that if we take this jump, we need to move fast because the shielding was not designed for the high-pressure drag of a subspace suture. I looked at Lyra as she waited for the order. Behind us, the twin suns were shrinking into distant golden pinpricks, while the gate ahead looked like a shimmering violet tear in the velvet of space. I told her to align the nose, deciding that if the front door to Earth was locked, we would find another way into the house. The Beetle 68 groaned as the FTL engines flared for the final alignment, carrying us toward the unknown with a stolen shield, an ancient map, and a greenhouse plated with alien plants. Lyra's hands remained rock steady on the manual yokes as she drove the Beetle 68 straight into the violet aperture. The space folded with a thundering jolt, pulling us inside with an intense shudder before quickly stabilizing. The stars did not stretch, but rather snapped into a tunnel of shimmering violet, the suture, marking our entrance onto the subspace road. Inside this warp bubble, the ship settled into a strange and heavy stillness. The familiar hum of the Osiris-7 core settled down. Lyra leaned into her seat and flicked her hair back, her eyes fixed on the navigational drift as she kept us centered in the suture's sweet spot. She estimated our travel time at 4 hours and warned that while the charter identified our destination as Sector 12, the stars would likely look unrecognizable. I unbuckled and stood up, noticing that the gravity felt slightly thick within the subspace corridor. As I headed toward the galley for a coffee, I passed the research bay and observed Kalen hunched over the Nezimer core. His face was lit by the orange glow of the jerry-rigged shielding as he mapped the logic paths of the alien hardware with a surgeon's precision. He noted that the core was drawing power directly from the suture, acting as a sponge rather than a battery, and confirmed we were finally driving with the fuel the technology was intended for. Further aft, I found Doc Silas in the greenhouse, though he was no longer tending to the flora. He sat on a crate, cleaning his shotgun with a methodical and rhythmic focus, while the emerald light of the Tsin Prime plants cast long shadows across his weathered face. He remarked that the air was changing, growing richer in nitrogen and oxygen as the plants terraformed the room to match their home. He expressed a preference for breathing their air over the recycled tin of the USF. I returned to the cockpit after making 2 cups of coffee and sat in the tandem seat next to Lyra, handing her a mug. After taking a sip, I pulled up the ship's schematic on the blue screen. Every redundancy was marked green, and the double-layered hull held perfectly against the subspace pressure. Lyra observed that those back on Earth did not realize what they had built, noting that while the ship was designed for war, we were currently fighting the universe itself. The Beetle 68 continued its journey with an inexpressible heaviness as we slid through the violet pocket of the suture. I moved down to the engine room, walking between the massive bulkheads that housed the heart of the vessel. The Osiris-7 core remained encased in its reinforced locker, but the real labor was being performed by the Nezimer shielding module. It cast an orange tint over the machinery and absorbed the subspace drag, so the sublight engines did not have to fight the friction. I pulled up the master diagnostic on my wrist link to check the status of the boat. In the cockpit, Lyra remained alone with the 3D charter glowing on her HUD. Beneath her feet, the weapons bay was secure, with the Vanguard cannons and coil guns retracted and locked. The airlock doors were sealed tight, serving as the only barrier against the crushing pressure outside. On the lower floor, Kalen's territory remained orderly, with the fabricator idling and the Ragnarok suits recharging in their racks. Upstairs in the greenhouse, the oxygen levels continued to spike, providing a richness that the rest of the ship lacked. The living quarters and the galley were silent, and the lab remained sterile, smelling of ozone and antiseptic. Opposite the planning room, I could hear the hum of the sonic shower as Lyra finally took a moment for herself. Everything appeared stable. The Beetle was gliding rather than fighting. I finished my rounds at the engine core, confirming there were no leaks or heat spikes in the thruster linkages. I informed Lyra that the engine room was green and asked for an update on our exit. She responded that the suture was thinning out and directed us to prepare for transition to real space in around 20 minutes or so. The transition out of the suture was not the violent, bone-rattling thunderclap we had come to expect from standard warp jumps. Instead, because we exited through a stabilized gravitational gate, the rupture was surprisingly smooth, lacking the gut-wrenching jolt of a hop between Earth and Sun Prime. For a split second, the cockpit windows were filled with white static, and then the glare of a billion lights hit the glass. Lyra exhaled sharply, her hair still damp from the sonic shower, as she snapped her harness into the pilot's chair and stabilized our velocity. She pointed to the telemetry, noting that we were no longer in a dead system or even the same neighborhood. We had hopped billions of light years into the Mom Z14 cluster. Outside, the void was a chaotic and neon-drenched tapestry. This was no wasteland, but a high-density industrial megalopolis of the stars. Massive space stations, monolithic blocks of obsidian and shifting geometric light, hung in the gravity wells of 3 colonized planets. These were global cities, webbed with transit rings and docking spires miles long, featuring flickering corporate sigils and spectra that hurt the eyes. It was a multi-species hub pulsing with the heat of 1 trillion souls and the efficient hum of ultramodern commerce. Space-side hotels and refineries were layered in a shimmering lattice around the planets, and Lyra whispered that the traffic was heavy, noting that our ship stuck out like a rusted thumb. Suddenly, 3 crystalline podships detached from a nearby patrol pylon. They moved with authority as they glided using thrusters and pulled into a tight, flanking formation around our bow. Their hulls were made of crystalline material that glowed when hit at the right angle against the sun. I reached for the USF translation module, which was running hot as it tried to parse the volume of high-frequency data hitting our receiver. I toggled the external comms, identifying us as the BEETLE 68 and stating that we were travelers from the suture, native to a long-distant planet, and that we were seeking peaceful harbor. The translator broadcast a series of linguistic tones with a neutral accent while the crystalline pods hovered, their sharp edges reflecting the neon sprawl. Kalen shouted from the storage bay that they were not arming weapons, but asking for corporate clearance or a lineage token, assuming we were private contractors or long-range scouts. There are a total of 14 of these hubs scattered around 14 other similar gates within this planetary system, and the crew just came through one of the gates. The docking sequence was a masterclass in gravitational engineering. As Lyra guided the BEETLE 68 into the obsidian spire, amber-orange tractor beams caught our hull and pulled us with eerie smoothness into a pressurized berth. To our starboard, an obsidian luxury alien cruiser docked at the adjacent pier, its sheer scale making the BEETLE look like a tugboat. I commanded the crew to check their seals, reminding them we were now in the center of the galaxy. As the airlock cycled open, we were met by a spectacle on the translucent docking platform. A greeting party stood there, led by an ambassador with a cephalopodic head and obsidian eyes set atop a powerful, 6-limbed arachnid body. He was draped in shifting fabrics of teal and royal purple, his tentacles adorned with glittering jewels that pulsed with an internal glow. The ambassador welcomed us as travelers of the Soul Sector, his voice vibrating directly from a resonator on his chest in perfect English. He explained that they had monitored our trajectory since we broke the suture back in Sun Prime and were already familiar with our kind, though it had been a long time since humans had walked those halls. His statement confirmed our suspicion of the Nezimer belonging to a human culture. He led us into a private planning lounge filled with floating furniture and gravity-defying water features. Here, he provided the history of his race, the Korvath, who served as the stewards of these sectors and managers of the Suture roads. Their system was a post-scarcity marvel built on the exploitation of subspace gaps. He emphasized that they thrived because they respected the borders of the fold and dismissed rumors of a great silence as fables intended to keep pilots from wandering too far into the unmapped dark. The atmosphere was one of suffocating luxury and overwhelming technological superiority. We felt small and primitive in our scarred armored suits as we offered our star charts and the basics of our history, keeping the details of the nuclear blast and the Sky Eaters to ourselves. But as the meeting drew to a close, the memory of the derelict Nezimer pushed me to speak. I leaned forward, the reflection of the hub's neon lights glinting off my visor, and stated that we had found something in the dark before taking the suture. "We appreciate the hospitality, Ambassador," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "But we didn't just come here for trade. We found something in the dark before we took the suture. We need to talk about a ship, the Nezimer." The ambassador's tentacles went rigid instantly. The jewels on his face dimmed, and his 6 arachnoid legs clicked against the floor as he recoiled. The vibe of the room shifted from an inviting aura to a grim one, and the luxury of the lounge suddenly felt like a cage. The transition into the heart of Hub 09 was not a walk, but a descent into a cathedral of alien industry. The ambassador led the crew through a series of gravitation lifts that defied the stomach's sense of equilibrium, moving with a sickening, silent speed that blurred the station's obsidian corridors into streaks of violet light. When the doors finally hissed open, they were deposited into the observation spire, a massive, hemispherical dome of reinforced glass crystals that felt less like a room and more like a perch over the edge of the universe. Outside, the Mom Z14 cluster space pulsed with the frantic energy of a trillion souls. Thousands of ships, jagged crystalline pods, sleek obsidian cruisers, and heavy metallic freighters weave through shimmering gravity lanes like schools of colorful, glowing fish in a pool. Far on the horizon, too distant for human eyes to completely catch, 3 colonized worlds hung in the velvet black like glowing jewels, webbed by transit rings that flickered with the cold, efficient neon of corporate vigils. Inside the dome, holographic projectors the size of skyscrapers scrolled through millions of lines of nonlinear script, a cascading waterfall of trade data and lineage registries that bathed the crew's scarred armored suits in a ghostly, shifting glow. "It's a shopping mall for the galaxy," Lyra retorted, her voice barely audible over the low, electronic thrum of the station's life support. She kept her hand near her coil gun in a lazy manner, her eyes tracking the rhythmic, clicking movement of the ambassador's arachnoid limbs. The atmosphere shifted from wonder to a suffocating weight as the ambassador, Volkor, revealed the true nature of their discovery. He didn't just speak. His chest resonator vibrated with a frequency that made the floor plates hum beneath their boots. He spoke with a great reverence for the human ancestors. The first humanity, they were known as the Omeran. They were the apex ancestors, the ones who mapped the suture eons before the Great Silence erased them from the stars. But they left a ghost behind, the Nezimer. It was the pinnacle of their technology from an era when even the VRR-TAC were but a fledgling race on a cosmic scale. But now, that same ship has twisted into a contagion seed, a vessel for a biological overwrite that hungers for the very noise of our technology. We've known of it for centuries, yet we chose the coward's path. We wiped the archives and declared that Supreme Zone Tomb, forbidden to anyone of the VRR-TAC coalition. Why? Because the Nezimer does not stay dormant. Years ago, researchers brought a stowaway infection back on their hull, and it tore through their home worlds like wildfire. There was no cure, no containment, no contingency plan, only the cold mercy of orbital bombardment. We exterminated the entire planet to ash just to keep that silence from spreading. "You haven't just traveled billions of miles, Captain," Volkor rumbled, his deep obsidian eyes fixed on the salvaged core log. "You have brought the hunter to the only place in the galaxy that was still loud enough to hear." With a sharp command, the ambassador led them away from the view of the stars and into a hidden, high-security research wing. This was a place of clinical, ultramodern precision, where the air smelled of sharp ozone and ancient dust. Crystalline vats and gravity stasis fields lined the walls, glowing with a feverish orange light that matched the flicker of the jewels on the ambassador's face. "Kalen, get the scanners ready," the captain ordered, his voice steady despite the oppressive luxury of the lab. "If we're the echoes of this first humanity, I want to know exactly what the original voice sounded like." As they stepped into the sterile glow of the lab, the BEETLE 68 sat in its berth far above, its retrofitted shields the only thing muffling the Nesmer core in its hold. A long-lost relic of a bygone species, now silently tucked away into our tiny ship, somewhere in the cluster of the Mom Z14 system. The gravitation lifts deposited them back into the high-security wing with a silent, stomach-churning deceleration. Volkor's multi-limbed frame was a silhouette of jagged edges against the bioluminescent scanners, his arachnoid legs clicking a frantic staccato on the dark, frictionless floor. He wasn't looking at the crew. He was staring at the BEETLE 68 schematics as if seeing a ghost. "Your ship's core? It isn't a breakthrough, Captain," Volkor rumbled, his chest resonator vibrating with a somber depth. "Our scanners picked up similar energy as soon as your ship entered our space. It's a poor imitation of a masterpiece. Your engineers didn't innovate the ship, Captain. They scavenged a long-dead race. They found the blueprints of the first humanity and stripped them down to a language your primitive age could grasp. You didn't leap forward, you just remembered how to walk again." He swiped a jeweled limb across a translucent display, bringing up ancient star charts that predated the Korvatha's own written history. 7,000 cycles ago, your ancestors were the apex. When the first humanity, the Omeran, arrived in this sector 7,000 cycles ago, the VRR-TAC, my people, were a primitive, budding race. Your ancestors didn't conquer us. They showed us the suture roads. They gave us the tools to grow. We are the inheritors of their lineage, just the same as you are now. Kalen stands by the Nesmer core, his hands trembling as the Korvath decryption algorithms finally pierce the last of the corrupted data layers. The Nesmer core data spills out into the HUDs surrounding the lab as the truth of the Nesmer reveals itself. It wasn't some deep space explorer. It was a lifeboat. The core reveals a new entity, a biological rot, a galaxy-spanning entity that defies any standard cosmological classification. It wasn't a fleet or an army. It was a singular, endless hunger that could rot away metal and rewrite flesh. The Nesmer had been the last refuge, the final bastion of a humanity that once ruled the stars. But when it dropped out of FDL, a fragment of the entity, merely a mass the size of a human, had breached the hull. "The mutation we saw," Doc Silas whispers, staring at the playback of the Nesmer's final minutes. "It wasn't an attack. It was a feeding." The data reveals the last few logs, as most of the remaining data seems corrupted beyond repair due to the core remaining dormant for all these thousands of years. Moments before the rot consumed the Nesmer, a handful of high-speed cruisers had detached, purging their advanced technology to erase any electronic trace. They fled into the black, heading for a localized void bubble, a pocket of space so isolated and empty that the hunger wouldn't notice a spark. They chose a small, yellow star system surrounded by light years of nothing. They chose Earth. They shut the FDL gate near Venus behind them. I say, the realization settling into my gut. They buried the technology, abandoned the suture, and chose to become small, to become quiet. They didn't want the hunger to follow them to the one place that was safe. And for 7,000 years, that silence was your shield, Volkor replied, his jewels flickering a warning red. But you reopened the suture. You brought the noise back. And this hub, it's the loudest thing in the sector. The walk back to the docking cradle felt longer than before. The air in Hub 09 smelled of sharp ozone and the cold, metallic tang of the refineries that sprawled outside the viewports. VRR-TAC engineers swarmed the BEETLE, their movements fluid and alien as they inspected our retrofitted primitive ship. The entity can't use the gates, or at least we haven't encountered any known events related to such a case throughout our data stream, Volkor says, his arachnoid legs clicking with a sudden, frantic energy. But it has the memory of the Nesmer. It knows the frequency. If we don't sever this connection, we aren't just looking at a regional plague. We've signaled the end of the 1,000-years-long peace. The sprawling, ultramodern hub outside the windows, the hotels, the refineries, the billions of lives, suddenly feels like a dinner plate. How do we kill it? I ask, my hand tightening on the grip of my coil gun. You don't kill a rot that has eaten galaxies, Captain, Volcor replies, turning to the master terminal. You just burn the host. Kalen stopped at the base of the ramp, looking up at the ambassador. We spent around 20 to 30 minutes inside that rod on the Nesmer. We breathed the air. Why aren't we part of that screaming mess, Mr. Volcor? Volcor's multi-limbed frame stilled for a second, his mind drifting into deep thought. His obsidian eyes remained fixated on Kalen with a sudden, clinical intensity. He brought out a very thin, needle-like apparatus from his medbay, hovering near by his thought process alone. Hold still, human, the ambassador vibrated. Your biology is an echo of a long-lost knowledge. To answer the why, I must see the how. Kalen winced, pulling back a half step as the gleaming tip hovered near his forearm. Whoa, easy there, Doc Octopus. I'm a bit attached to my fluids. You're not going to turn me into a science project, are you? Only but a single drop, Kalen human. Volcor rumbled, the jewels on his face flickering a reassuring teal. With a nervous glance at the captain, Kalen sighed and offered his arm. Fine, but if I start growing extra legs, we're going to have a very awkward conversation about my wardrobe. The needle pricked with cold, numbing precision. Volcor immediately fed the sample into a crystalline vat, where multi-pronged apparatuses and scanners began to shred the DNA into shimmering, three-dimensional strands. The ambassador's tentacles twitched over the holographic interface, his movements losing their rehearsed grace and becoming frantic as genuine surprise finally broke through his stoic veneer. By the void, the ambassador whispered, the resonators on his chest humming with a discordant pitch. Your ancestors were more than thorough. They were meticulous. His alien tongue trying to find the proper wording for his genuine excitement. It was not so easy to surprise an alien race that has been dominating the galaxy for thousands of years. He swiped a limb, magnifying a specific, tangled segment of Kalen's genetic sequence. To the crew, it looked like a messy knot of junk code, but to the Korvath, it was a masterpiece of biological engineering. This is not a natural evolution, Volcor said, his obsidian eyes widening as he parsed the cascading streams of the real-time analysis. His multiple limbs moved in a blur, isolating a tangled, dark matter strand of Kalen's genetic sequence. They edited your blueprint. They inserted a deliberate genetic blockage with a sequence of junk code that acts as a bioelectrical dampener. The ambassador leaned in, the jewels on his brow pulsing with a low, rhythmic violet. The rot feeds on the specific, high-frequency resonance of advanced human consciousness. To the hunger, your ancestors were a flare in the dark, like a hunter picking up the scent of its prey. But those who fled, they made you unwanted, unpalatable. He straightened his massive, arachnoid frame, his voice dropping into a register that vibrated through the crew's very marrow. They lowered the broadcast frequency of your very souls. It was a masterstroke of biological camouflage that worked as long as you remained within the silence of the soul system. However, Volcor's eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing the flickering DNA strands as if they were a crime scene. Don't mistake this for a comfort, young one. If the rot gets a hold of you, it will feed nonetheless. You were only safe because it could not sense your presence. You were a ghost in its peripheral vision. But after the Nesmer, the hunger will not grant you that same mercy again. You aren't just prey anymore. You're a beacon. Kalen rubbed his arm, looking at the glowing double helix. So we were just static? We survive because we're the cosmic equivalent of white noise. Precisely, Kalen human, Volcor replied, his voice hushed with a new, grim respect. You were just enough of a lower frequency broadcast that the silence simply didn't notice. It looked right past you for 7,000 years, right up until the moment you turned that Osiris core back on and screamed your location to the stars. Turning my head towards the lower docks, my eyes locked on the BEETLE 68, its new shielding plates catching the laboratory's crystal cyan light. So we've been hiding in plain sight. And now we've gone and turned the volume up to 10, I said, with a deep sigh. Precisely, Warden Human. Volkor said. The VRR TAC owe your lineage a debt 7,000 cycles old. Consider this shielding the first payment. Stay within the hub's perimeter. The council will want your testimony. We need to find a weakness before the silence decides to answer that signal. I signaled the crew. Lyra, get to the cockpit. Doc and Kalen, I want those new shielding upgrades on the blue screen now. We're staying put for the council, but I want us ready to burn the second things go sideways. I left Kalen at the airlock, his legs dangling out of a maintenance hatch in the lower storage bay like a discarded pair of coveralls. He was neck deep in the Beetle's guts, recalibrating the feedback loops on the new upgrades Vol had so graciously gifted us. The ship looked unnerving now. It had been dipped in liquid midnight, the VRR TAC platings making the hull smooth and hauntingly silent. Don't touch anything you can't put back. Kalen, I called out. My boots made a sharp, lonely echo against the translucent docking pier. Just checking the power draw, Captain, his voice came back, muffled by the heavy plating. This VRR TAC kit is thirsty. It's eating 15% more idle power just to keep any radiation noise from leaking. It's proper engineering, though? Solid. I turned my attention to Lyra and document Lyra had her hands buried deep in her flight jacket, her eyes darting between the monolithic obsidian spires and the twitchy yet curious sense of adventure that loomed behind them. Crystalline patrol ships that drifted like glass shards outside the glass steel. Silas gripped his medkit, his gaze narrowed at the passing crowds with the wary suspicion of a man expecting a plague. Wes stepped off the pier and onto a primary graph strip. It was not a typical walkway, but a localized river of gravity that swept us toward the main concourse of Hub 09. The scale was staggering, a cathedral of shifting crystalline lattices that pulsed miles above us with the rhythmic thrum of the station's life support. There were no signs in English, no familiar icons to guide a human eye. Instead, the air was thick with hovering, three-dimensional light sculptures of geometric equations and color-coded bursts that the locals navigated by instinct. The atmosphere carried a sharp, metallic tang of ionized copper overlaid with a heavy, artificial sweetness like synthetic nectar. Look at the passengers, Cap, Lyra whispered, gesturing toward the entities drifting past. It was a nightmare of evolution. To our left, a cluster of spindly, insectoid creatures with translucent wings moved with a frantic, buzzing energy, their carapaces etched with glowing corporate sigils. Further down, a massive tank filled with swirling green gas rolled along a dedicated rail, its dozen mechanical arms protruding to interact with a nearby kiosk. It's a bloody hive, Silas muttered. No one's looking at us. We're just more data in the stream. He was right. Despite our blocky, scarred armored suits and the primitive clunk of our gear, the inhabitants of Hub 09 treated us with chilling indifference. We passed a trading floor where a dozen species gestured at holographic price feeds, their bioluminescent patches flashing in a dizzying array of colors. The architecture was all sharp angles and non-reflective surfaces, industrial, futuristic, and utterly devoid of human comfort. There were no chairs, only magnetic tethers and perches. At a massive overlook, we gazed down into the station's gut, a vertical shaft, miles deep where cargo pods the size of the Beetle were being sorted by colossal, many-armed carrybots that moved with a grace that seemed almost organic. Captain, Kalen's voice crackled in my ear, sounding genuinely impressed. I'm looking at the hull integration from the inside. The VRR TAC didn't just bolt this shield on. They fused it into our primary heat sinks. The Beetle is actually running cooler now. It's like the ship is breathing through the shield. Keep an eye on it, I replied, my eyes fixed on a luxury cruiser docking at a distant spire. We're just scouting. See if you can interface our NAV charts with their Hot Pocket network without tripping a security flag. We pushed deeper into the hub, reaching a social tier where the luxury felt oppressive. Floating gardens of crystalline flora hung from the ceiling in 0G, shedding a soft, glowing dust that settled on the exquisitely garbed Korvath elite. Everything was quiet, efficient, and billions of years ahead of us. It's beautiful, Lyra said softly, but it feels like a graveyard that hasn't realized it's dead yet. As we raked the edge of the trade district, a frantic chirping erupted from Silas's scanner. It wasn't a medical emergency, but a hit on a unique radiation signature. He traced it to a high-end exotic biologicals shop nearby. It was a storefront of shifting, iridescent glass where the air grew cold and the bustling noises of the station seemed to dim. Inside, the shop was a gallery of horrors and wonders. Stasis jars held glowing, pulsating spores from nebula clouds, and severed limbs of extinct apex predators were mounted on gravity pedestals like fine art. In the center of the room, a series of pressurized vats contained swirling, sentient mists that reacted to our body heat, pressing against the glass in a silent, desperate mimicry of human faces. The shopkeeper, a spindly creature with multiple sets of eyes that moved independently, didn't offer a greeting. It merely adjusted a dial on a containment field, and the radiation signature spiked. Something in the back of that shop was singing in a frequency that Silas's scanner recognized from the Nesmer logs. It was a trade in exotic items, from weapons, plant samples, energy packs, and batteries to even alien parts packaged neatly as curiosities for the bored elites of the MOM Z14. The grav strip hummed to a halt, depositing us at the threshold of a high-end storefront of shifting, iridescent glass. The air here was colder, the ambient bustle of the station's commerce dimming into a heavy, expectant silence. This was the trade district's underbelly, a gallery of exotic biologicals, where the wonders of the MOM Z14 system were displayed like trophies. Inside, the shop was a fever dream of specialized evolution. Lyra immediately drifted toward a rack of advanced hardware, alien weaponry that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. It was sleek, clearly packed a punch, and likely possessed intense plasma blasts that could obliterate any Terran shielding plates. She ran a gloved finger along a pulsing violet rail, her eyes narrowing with a pilot's appreciation for high-output kinetic energy. Nearby, Doc Silas was already hunched over a row of pressurized vats, his scanner chirping frantically as he inspected bioluminescent plant samples that looked like tangled neon veins. "Cap, look at this," Silas muttered, his face illuminated by a flickering amber glow from a stasis jar. "These aren't just plants. They are akin to some sort of bioelectrical conductors. Nothing in our Earth's natural fauna history had such unique characteristics as these specimens." I stepped toward the counter to address the shopkeeper, who was some type of alienoid, spindly creature with multiple sets of eyes that moved independently, like marbles in a jar. I tapped my USF translator, the device whining as it struggled to parse the high-frequency data of the hub. "We're seeking information on these items," I said, my voice sounding flat and primitive in the sterile air. The translator chirped, broadcasting a series of melodic clicks, but the shopkeeper didn't respond with sound. Instead, it began a complex, intricate pattern of sign language, its four arms weaving alienoid patterns of sharp angles with a slow, artistic elegance to my human eyes. My translator pulsed a dull red. Syntax error, non-acoustic input. I tried again, gesturing crudely towards Silas's scanner, but the creature's eyes only narrowed, its movements becoming faster, more agitated. That's when a figure detached itself from the obsidian shadows of the promenade. He was lanky, his limbs almost too long for his frame, and his four eyes stacked in pairs, and he blinked in a synchronized, unsettling rhythm and 6 arms. His skin was pale, patterned with dark, ring-like spots all over his skin, and his long, elf-like ears twitched at the metallic tang of the shop. He wore a high-collared, multi-layered silk wrap that accommodated all 4 of his arms, 2 of which were folded respectfully across his chest. "Greetings, Solaran," he said. His English was so fluid and precise it felt like he'd been speaking it since the dawn of time. "I am Ken. I have been assigned by the ambassador to serve as your primary guide. Please, do not distress the vendor. His dialect is written in the spiritual essence, not in the vibrations of the throat." Ken turned to the shopkeeper, his own arms weaving a rapid, graceful response that settled the creature instantly. Then, he looked at us with a mix of academic interest and deep-seated awe. "Follow me. Your designated sector is prepared."